Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Zimmerman. I'm an editor at Quirk Books, and I am so delighted to be introducing this Pride Month chat about queer horror between Hailey Piper and Lindsay King-Miller. I'll introduce the two participants, and then I'm going to clear out until question time and let them take it away. Hailey Piper is the Bram Stoker award-winning author of Queen of Teeth, A Light Most Hateful, The Worm and His Kings series, and other books of dark fiction. She is also the author of over 100 short stories, appearing in Weird Tales, Pseudopod, Cosmic Horror Monthly, Cast of Wonders, and various other publications. Her nonfiction appears in Writer's Digest, Library Journal, Crime Reads, and elsewhere. She lives with her wife in Maryland, where their occult rituals are secret. You can find her at haileypiper.com. Lindsay King-Miller is the author of Ask a Queer Chick, A Guide to Sex, Love, and Life for Girls Who Dig Girls. Her fiction has appeared in The Fiends in the Furrows, Tiny Nightmares, The Jewish Book of Horror, Fireside Fiction, Baffling Magazine, and numerous other publications. She lives in Denver with her partner and their 2 children, and The Z Word is her first novel. So I will turn it over to Hailey and Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Jess. And hi, Hailey. Thank you so much for being here.
No, I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to get to chat with you, especially because I'm not going to see what Stoker calls.
I know everybody's like, see it StokerCon, and it's like, actually.
Is that even legal? Are they allowed to have StokerCon without you?
I will be probably hiding from social media that weekend just because I will be sad.
We will all be sad. We'll miss you, but next time, another time.
Yeah.
So, queer horror. I mean, if anybody knows anything about queer horror, it is you. You are the maven of the genre. You have written so many books. Hailey, you've written so many books. And I'm sure
sorry.
that you're you're probably tired of people asking you about like your output and how you manage to be so prolific. We all assume it's a deal with a demon. We all wish we had that demon's number. We're moving on. But what I think is really like so cool about you and your work, you have so many books. You are constantly publishing. Do you have 2 more books coming out this year?
3.
3 more coming out this year, and you've already had 1 or 2 books out in 2024.
Cranberry Cove came out in April. Song of the Tyrant Worm will finish up the Worm and His Kings trilogy. As by the time this is up, I think the audiobook will be up, and then the paperback and ebook are June 8th. The Ghostlands of Natalie Glasgow will come out in August, except for the people who pre-ordered the hardcovers should get it a little earlier. But that'll bring back my debut novella, The Possession of Natalie Glasgow, with 6 new stories. And then my vampire book, All the Hearts You Eat, comes out in October.
Yes, and I have read All the Hearts You Eat, and it is spectacular. And I am
thank you so much for doing that, and especially because it's like, if this was a hardcover, you could hurt someone with it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to read it.
I loved it, and I'm very grateful that I got a chance to read it early. But I think the thing that's so cool about your work is you have all these stories. You are constantly writing. Your productivity is off the charts. And almost everything that you've published is some variation on queer horror, right? Maybe the Possession of Natalie Glasgow but I always thought the line was kind of queer coded.
Well, the funny thing is, so originally when I wrote The Possession of Natalie Glasgow, I had talked in the prose here and there, talked about Margaret's partner. And unfortunately at the time, because it was my first book, I wasn't as forthright as you, where you just like, now this is going to be pride parade, queer clubs, gay night scene. Like you came in like just charging like a rocket, with like a rainbow rocket. I was a bit more nervous. I was just like, I don't know how people are going to respond. And it was a time when I still worried about that kind of thing. So I just cut almost every reference to her partner, except like near the end of chapter 5, I think there's a part where she like calls her, but it doesn't, you don't know that's who it is. It just says she calls Trish and says not to expect her home for dinner, but it doesn't say whether Trish is like her sister or a roommate or something. But that, so that's one of the nice things with the Ghostlands and Night of Glasgow. We're not changing the text of T-Pong, but the other stories will get to flesh that out more. You'll get to see Margaret's house. You'll get to meet Trish in a couple stories. She actually gets to tell about a supernatural thing that happened to her when her family used to live in London when she was a child. So you get to see different facets of that, but yeah, it gets to bring the queerness back to, or at least the overt queerness back to that story. Short fiction is kind of more of a mixed bag, but I also go a little harder for the queerness in the short fiction. But yeah, most of the books, maybe all the books. Yeah, I think all the books. Yeah. But and I know, and so far that's the case with you. Both your nonfiction and your fiction so far are, wholly queer. And again, you don't have that whole like, I don't know how people are going to feel about this. You're just like, I don't care how people feel about this. It's like slap you with a rainbow.
Well, I think that, part of that, honestly, is due to you, not only to you, but there has been such an explosion of queer horror in the last few years, and writers like you and Eric LaRocca and Gretchen Felker-Martin have really proved that it's not just like a niche audience. There's a huge audience for it. People want queer horror, people will show up for it over and over again. And so I guess I feel like you've kind of been a trailblazer in that regard, and I think you are one of the people who has made it more possible for new writers to come into horror and open with, "Hi, I'm really gay," and in fact, your kind of mantra or your motto on social media is making horror gay as fuck, right?
See, that wasn't on purpose. That was just me being playful because I needed to kind of cheerlead myself into it. But then it kind of just,
but I think you succeeded. I think you actually have made horror gay as fuck. Like, it is now.
See, the thing is, because I guess, and that's just maybe me, but I don't see myself that way as much. But that's because I feel like there are people who had to break that ground before us, like Clive Barker, like Poppy Z. Bright,
for sure.
Billy Martin writing as Poppy Z. Bright, and many others, like queer, because like people like, oh well, if you feel horror is inherently queer, why are you saying make horror gay as fuck? And it's like, well, because I feel like that's just horror getting back to its true self. I don't know how you feel with that, but it's just like, it's just like there was a question at some point where it was like, heteronormacy with horror, and I'm like, that is something I feel that is kind of placed upon horror. I don't feel like that's something that grows out of horror, because I feel horror is a genre of the outsider, and that's where queer folk are. And it was refreshing to read your short fiction because, like, my first encounter with your fiction was the Fiends and the Furrows, the fruit. And when you're reading a book, like I was interested in that anthology regardless, because I'm like, oh, this is neat, a folk horror anthology. But I wasn't, when you think of folk horror, you kind of think of like old timey, circumstances, and that typically means not really letting the queer folk come to the forefront. And so it was like, I think your story was like the third in the book, and it was refreshing, like, get to that, and it's just like, oh, they're just here, they're just gonna be gay, and that's just gonna be casual about it. It's not the thrust of the story, and that's one of the neat things, I think, because like, okay, actually, you with your book and that story, you're kind of showing both parts of this paradigm that I like, is that queer horror can be, you have a horror story and there are characters and they happen to be queer. there can be thematic things, but it's not like the story's about them being queer. They just are queer characters. But also you can have something where it's like, no, the queerness is part of the point. We are discussing this.
Right.
And I think, you know, with I tend to do the former, but with thematic stuff. Like I want to layer that in, and you know, it goes over some people's heads, but whatever. And then with all the hearts you eat, I was like, no, we're talking about this, and it's going to be uncomfortable. I need to get this out of my system. And I feel like the Z word is like that too, in the sense that it is very overt about it, and we are talking about these circumstances, particularly corporate pride. What's the other word? Rainbow capitalism.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that outside of Pride Month isn't talked a ton about, but it does affect the whole year, because we have this thing where and this goes beyond queerness, is just the idea of people aligning themselves with brands as if that's their identity. And when you start to merge that with queerness, it becomes, I feel, very dangerous. It's not the same as like, yeah, I'm going to wear a Nike shirt. It's, I'm going to wear a rainbow Nike shirt until it's a problem for some people, and then just not, because it's all rainbows while we're worth money. But the moment there's conservative pushback, a corporation is like, oh, I don't know her.
Right. I mean, look at like Target. People have always been like, oh, Target, they're such good allies. They carry Pride merch. And then this year they were like, oh, we're going to roll back our Pride merch and take it out of half of our stores because people were so shitty about it last year. And it's like, okay, you know, Target, the large corporation Target, is not actually like in the fight with us. They're not actually here for queer liberation. They're here to make money. And if you can acknowledge that from the beginning and be like, okay, well, they're going to show up when it's convenient and not when it's not, then it's not that surprising or disappointing. But if you see branding as progress, then as soon as that's taken away, it feels like we're losing ground. And in fact, I mean, I think in a lot of ways we are losing ground. And especially trans people are losing ground in the US in the last couple of years. And brands aren't showing up for that. You know, they're not showing up to like support people who are losing their health care. That's not what they're here for. They're here to like sell some coffee cups.
Right. And I think, and on the one hand, that is a short-sighted decision, which is most of business decisions anymore. It's all about quarterly profits and that kind of crap. Because there are many grounds. And so while on a legal standpoint, there is ground being lost, I think socially there are more people than ever who are with us. And that's where it's short-sighted. It's just like the people buying the rainbow merch are not typically as many queer folk as there are, like, I think, straight allies. Like parents, for example, parents of queer kids are going to be buying that kind of stuff because they want to show their kids they're supportive. Friends of them, like, etc. So I'm like, you're by pulling that stuff, what you're saying, I mean, all you're doing is like, it's revealing the truth to people who were otherwise not, up on that. In my opinion, at least. That's my observation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the other side of it is we have this because brands want to be squeaky clean. That way they can appeal to the broadest, bunch of people. And the dangerous side of that is when you start aligning your queerness with that branding and you start looking at it as that starts to have to become squeaky clean. And that means that you start getting after other queer folk because either they're imperfect or worse, honestly, because they're messy queers, because their queerness is not simple enough to brand. And you stop looking at other queer folk as people and start looking at them as flesh and blood advertisements for queerness.
Right. Yes. And then you see people saying things like, oh, kink at Pride sets the
Right.
movement back, as though there has ever been Pride without like leather and the kink
Exactly.
scene. Like
Exactly.
the idea that that anyone owes it to the cause to appeal to a conservative audience,
Right.
because otherwise you're
You're the bad one.
you're ruining the brand, right?
Right. Right. It's exactly it. And it's just like our our existence is not to win customers, it's to live. It is to have our experiences and express ourselves and enjoy life. Like this ridiculous Puritan thing that we've all like, it's not actually even Puritan, it goes deeper than that, because the Puritans came and oppressed the people who, but that those seeds are still there, they of this idea that life is supposed to be about suffering. um
Right.
and and it's nonsense, but it takes hold, especially in America, I feel, because what better way to tell people that they should work themselves to death and nothing else?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I
And
feel queerness fights that, like at its core. I think queerness is an existential disagreement of that, because how many of us have suffered through different things because of our, not because of our queerness, but because of how people react to our queerness,
uh-huh.
and yet we continue to be queer. It's not something we can't pull that out of our shell, our person internal shelves. We are not Target stores. We can just stop being queer.
Right, right. We can't roll it back because we get boycotted.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
And
and
there
that's
and
the
there is
difference.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that I feel like you touched on something that I love about your books and your writing, which is that you do write this like real and messy and chaotic kind of depiction of queer existence, and you're not writing sanitized characters, and it doesn't feel like you're thinking, how can I make sure that this queer story is appealing to straight people, right? and
Right.
and I love that. I mean, one of the things that I love about your work is just that you have written so many stories over the last few years, so many queer stories, and they're all different, and they're all, unique and real and honest and raw, and just your work, you can look at it and understand that queerness is so much more than one thing. There are so many different queer stories that are still waiting to be told. And so I don't know, I guess this is veering dangerously close to the dreaded "where do you get your ideas" question, which we all hate so much. But I wonder if you want to just like talk a little bit about, you know, what what does it mean to you to write all of this vast array of queer stories and queer characters?
Well, and I've started saying this in things more lately because it came up from a private conversation with a friend, but it's just like I think I think the best way to go about writing is that, how to put this? Okay, so this is that age old advice of write what you know. The thing is, I think that it's more write what you live, write what you are. And for me, that looks like a garden of experience, which is influenced by all your thoughts and feelings, all the media that you've interacted with, all the people you've met, known, been friends with, loved, lost, etc. And they essentially help to grow that garden. And writing comes from essentially picking from that fruit. And so it shouldn't feel like, oh, I got to think up an idea. It should feel like there are things coming up from inside you because you're living, because you have people around you. So I suppose the way to look at it with regards to that question is just that I've known a lot of people and I've had experiences, and they just kind of, things merge together and become characters, and you want to tell their stories. um that, and obviously considering the content of my books, that's not to say any of these things really happened, but personalities inform decisions, and imagination informs plots and circumstances and things, and they merge together.
And
Yeah,
you're
I think queerness is so varied that it's impossible to get every kind of queerness from any one author. Like, it's definitely important to be reading from lots of different people, because we all have different perspectives. And that's another thing about the whole branding element, is that branding is supposed to be one face, and that's just, there's no such thing when it comes to queerness. You cannot get everything from me. You have to read Lindsay King-Miller. You have to read Carmen Maria Machado. You have to read River Solomon. Like, you have to branch out and discover things. You're going to get people who write very nice things. You're going to get people who read things like Clive Barker writes, and the vast spectrum in between.
Yeah. And I wonder if, when you're saying that about it's not just one person, it's not just one face, I wonder if that's where some of this like intra-community conflict and kind of censure comes
Oh,
from, is this
definitely.
idea that like this person whose experience is not like mine will end up representing me. People will assume that this
Right.
person speaks for me. And so I have to make them stop speaking because their story is going to erase mine. When really that's
When
not
really we
how it
need
works.
both of those stories.
Yeah.
That's what it is, because for some people that resonates greatly, and for others it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
resonate at all. And
Yeah.
and that's another thing. I've seen this with stuff where people are like, where's the blank rep in this queer story? It's like, you cannot expect a single story to represent every facet of queerness, nor every facet of human existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember fairly recently I saw like critique of a novel by a trans woman about trans women, um and a trans man had written like a criticism of this book that basically amounted to, this does not represent trans men. And it was kind of like,
Go write a book, my
it
guy.
doesn't
Like,
have to. It doesn't have
right.
to. Not everything has to be about you.
Right.
And if you
And
want
that's, I
something
think,
to
a
be
hard
about you,
thing.
you get to create it. Like,
Yes. Um,
we all get to do that.
I think I keep blaming corporate stuff, and I'm going to keep doing that. But I think it's,
It's
again,
fair.
branding, but also I think it's algorithms, because we have social media that kind of tries to tailor your experience to you, and so people kind of get this idea that everything should be for them, and it's not. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
there are books that are pretty much just about trans men, and you can read those too. And but
Right.
what you don't do is you sit there and read, it's like, where are the trans women? And it's like, you could apply that to literally everything. Where are the ace people? Where are the bisexual people? Where are the lesbians? It's just on and on and on and on.
Right.
And it's just like, you can't expect that to be all captured by one, because that's the thing. There's no such thing as an absolute omniscient perspective. We're each just a person expressing ourselves with our stories.
Mm-hmm. And I do think to some extent it's a little bit understandable, just because there has been so little like mainstream representation or even acknowledgement of LGBTQ people for such a long
Yeah.
time, that now it almost feels like if we get a little scrap, we have to demand more or we'll never get it. But the thing
Right.
is that those, first of all, it's all already out there. There are indie writers, there are indie presses, there are self-published writers. There's such a wealth of
Right.
stories. And just because you can't walk into a Target and find it on the shelf doesn't mean that it's not out there if you look for it. And also, if it really isn't out there, if the story that you want to read genuinely doesn't exist, you can read it.
Right. That's where this all started with me. It's just, I want to write the stories that I'm not finding. No Gods for Drowning was just, it wasn't even because of the queerness at first. It was just because, like, where's the fantasy story like this? And that didn't mean it didn't exist, but I couldn't find it. And so I was writing it. And that's just, but yeah, as far as queerness goes, it was all this. And now there are a bunch of stories, but that doesn't, again, it doesn't mean it covers everything. But there's also, if there's something you want, it probably exists, but that just doesn't mean it's easy to find. And you can ask people. It's I think it's better to ask people for recommendations than to demand things out of an author.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're not, I don't know, vending machines. We're not Subway. You can't like customize your own sandwich out of us. That's what you can do when you write. When you write, you get to work at the proverbial Subway. But you're also the customer in that sense. Like you because that's who you should be pleasing first, is yourself.
Yeah. So I have a question, going back to kind of the beginning of this conversation. You mentioned that with your first book, with Natalie Glasgow, you didn't feel super comfortable having it be like very overtly gay. And I'm wondering, like, when did that change and how did that change for you? How did you get to a point where you were like, okay, I can write about gay shit and it's going to be okay?
I think it was kind of baby steps, because after I wrote that, I started writing more queer short stories, like An Invitation to Darkness, The Burning of the Blueberries, which like Invitation to Darkness was about a woman who, it's like the 1800s. She was dressing as a man to be like a sea captain, and when she retires, she falls in love with a woman on this weird coast. And then Burning of the Blueberries was about a trans man who gets invited into this secret all men brotherhood. And what was the other one? Aggressive Mimicry was about a guy who liked these other guys. He had a crush on his best friend, but his best friend was only focused on these girls around them. And it just little baby steps like that. When I wrote Benny Rose, I felt it was obvious that Desiree was a lesbian, even though it wasn't. I did cut a couple things still. I think that's the difference, is just I still was writing this stuff. It's just a matter of what am I cutting. So like I cut Desiree having a crush on Sierra because I was worried that people would feel that undermined their friendship, which I don't feel that way, because queer folk are such good friends with each other, regardless of the feelings that we end up having for each other. But other characters make reference to her being gay, and I hope that was enough. That was clear enough. But yeah, so it's just babysit. And once that was, actually that hadn't even been out yet. But yeah, I think The Worm and His Kings, where I was just like, there was no way to write that and cut the queerness, because it was right in the concept. Monique's girlfriend is missing. She's trying to find her. There's no way to cut that out. So in that book, it was more, do I want to reveal that she's trans? And I did wait till halfway through the book, because even then it was just a matter of audience. I wasn't sure. It was like, I want the reader to make a decision about how they feel about Monique before they find out she's a trans woman.
Oh, interesting.
So it's just baby steps like that. But I think it also helped that readers were responsive. That makes a huge difference. That made a huge difference, to the point that now I'm kind of like, I don't care. I'm just doing my thing. Like, I don't worry about that stuff anymore. I don't think about.
I mean, at this point, it seems like, from where I sit, you have a massive readership, and you're kind of iconic. Like, people are gonna read your work, and you don't have to really make any of those concessions, because people know you and they know that you write amazing books, and so they're gonna follow you wherever you want to go. Have you ever had like an editor push back and say, like, this is too queer, or this is too
Do we really want to get into
not to
this?
be able to tell this. Oh, we don't have to. We don't
No,
have
I'm kidding.
to.
I'm kidding. But I will, before I answer that, I do want to say I don't think I should have made any concessions in the first place. I think that was just me being skittish. And for any queer writers who are watching this, don't make any concessions. I was
You don't
wrong.
have to.
Just don't. Just do. Tell your truth. It, like, at whatever level you're comfortable with, but don't start chipping away at who you are because of an imaginary audience that you think might not be accepting. There are people for your book. There are people for your stories. I definitely had a stretch of time where it was harder to get short stories placed that were queer. Aggressive mimicry, I think, was rejected over 30 times before and it ended up of course, in an all LGBTQ horror anthology.
Right.
As far as editors, not so much with books, I don't think. There have definitely been themes that I feel were queer that there was kind of a little pushback on, but by that point, I was just like, no, I'm gonna make that part longer. But yeah, with short stories, I won't name the magazine, but I was given feedback that was pretty transphobic. I don't know that they knew I was trans, but it was I don't know if I should even repeat this stuff, but in any case, it was at first I laughed, and I think that's a normal reaction to have at first because it's like, wow, like you're so out of touch. How ridiculous.
Right.
But later on it starts to bother you. It's like, okay, this one had a problem with it and they said it. What's the iceberg here? How many have had a problem and just didn't say anything? But, that is what it is. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't let that stop anything. Honestly, I think my big thing is that I don't want queer writers to feel like, and I feel like I'm dominating this conversation. I'm sorry. I don't want queer writers to feel like they have to talk about like bigotry and oppression of queer people to tell their stories. If they want to, then they should definitely do that. But I've noticed, and this is not just with queer folk, but with various marginalized groups, that a lot of what is allowed to be published is about, homophobia, like oppression, about bigotry.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what is considered appealing to audiences from outside of that group, because they're like, oh, it's like, and they don't think of it this way consciously, but it is kind of a little bit like tourism, like, persecution tourism.
And it's also, I think that's in a lot of ways how people from outside a marginalized community, that's what's legible to them, right? They don't think about, straight people don't always think about queer people unless they're thinking about homophobia. Cis people don't always think about trans people unless they're thinking about transphobia. So that's kind of the scope of their
and that
conceptualization of those communities.
Disability, it just on and on is just this kind of
absolutely.
And I think that I don't want writers to feel like they have to do that. Like, again, if that's what you want to do, then absolutely go for it. But I just don't want people to feel like they have to in order to get their work taken seriously. Because the thing is, for each marginalized group, there is more to us than how we're treated by the worst people.
I remember, this was several years ago, but I remember having a conversation with somebody who was non-binary, but who was generally perceived as a cis man. And they were saying, like, sometimes I don't feel like I have the right to claim being trans because I don't experience a lot of transphobia in my daily life because people just assume that I'm a man. I haven't had a lot of the persecution. I haven't had a lot of the suffering. And I was kind of just like, how sad that we're talking about suffering and oppression as the measure of your identity.
Of queerness.
Like you don't feel like you deserve to be non-binary, to be the person that you are, because you haven't been hurt enough to deserve it.
Right.
Like that shouldn't be, obviously it happens and obviously it matters, but it shouldn't be the definition of who we are.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
we are more than that.
Like look, if you feel like you have to be punished, that's a kink thing. Go work on that.
Totally. Yeah, have fun.
But as far as, it's not a measure of queerness. Like, if you don't experience this stuff, that's awesome. I hope that,
Right.
I love that for all of us someday.
Right. Yeah.
And that
also
goes to the, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say that goes to the Z word, I feel, because it's very comfortable with its, how do I put this? Displaying which areas are queer spaces and kind of safe spaces that way, versus when the queer folk are out in the rest of the world. I feel like that's kind of, I feel like there's a clear, you can feel when the narrative is crossing those lines. And maybe not every, I mean, that may not be every reader who sees that, but like that was an impression I got while reading it.
Yeah, and I did, I mean, I did really want to write about not just queer characters, but like queer spaces, queer communities, because I think that we don't always see a lot of, I think a lot of how straight people perceive queer people is about relationships, right? Romantic and sexual relationships, and that's
which is
kind of
why
the
we have
definition.
so many, with this idea that it's not a queer book unless there's two people of the same sex getting together or somebody coming out of the closet, and that's just like, that's so reductive. Like, those are still queer stories, but those aren't the only queer stories.
Right, exactly. And I'm really, and there is, there is sex and there are romantic relationships in the Z word, because I also,
and they're wonderful.
I like writing sex scenes. That's fun.
Yeah, and that's what is.
But I also think that like queer friendships are important. Queer communities are important.
Yes.
Queer, just being in a room full of queer people is important. And I wanted to write about that as well. And really kind of write a story where it's not like the power of love saves the day, but it's actually like having queer friends.
Right. It's the kind of the power of
save
community
you more than anything. Yeah. I have this, like, I was just gonna, my favorite movie that's not a horror movie is The Broken Hearts Club, which is it's like this rom-com that I feel like nobody but me has ever seen. But it's from like 1999 or 2000, something like that, and it's just about a group of gay men in West Hollywood. And there's a romantic subplot, but it doesn't end with a happily ever after. It really very much ends with like, it's focused on gay men, but it's very much like, as a gay man, you need friends more than you need a boyfriend. That's what's the most important. And I love that movie, and that kind of like, the way that it concludes is one of the reasons that I love it so much. And I wanted to kind of like have that same vibe, but also with, zombies and explosions and chainsaws.
Well, that's I absolutely feel the same way. It doesn't have to be like, and that's one of those things, like, I think definitely with a lot of queer spaces, like, sex does not define you having a relationship, and the same is true with love. A relationship is a decision. Love, love is a moving thing. It's an organism between people.
That's beautiful.
Now you mentioned movies, though, there was something with this that I felt, more than anything that's come out since then I felt like the Z Word was a spiritual successor to Return of the Living Dead. Because even though the zombies don't work the same, but I feel like the atmosphere of that movie is very like sex and camp and alternative culture, and I feel like that's kind of the same spirit as with the Z Word, where it is about like kind of this outsiderness and such. Obviously there isn't really a solution in that movie, but it's nice that there is one in the Z Word. As far as just like, yeah, we're gonna take back the Pride Parade.
Yeah, and I also I did have I don't know how much I should talk about the end of the book, because I don't want people to like
I would not
get mad at me. Okay, never mind. I
Lindsay,
won't say anything.
Buy your book.
I know.
Go buy Lindsay's book, and then
then you'll find out how it ends, and then we can talk more about
then then ask her. Everybody go read Lindsay's book and then bother her.
Please. Jess, I think that you're muted. I think your mic is muted. Hi, Jess.
Yes, I didn't do that. Crowdcast did that to me. I felt like coming in on the discussion of community and also the wonderful coda of everybody go buy Lindsay's book was a good time to come and discuss some of the questions that we have from you guys' community. Although before I get to, we got a couple of questions from your followers on Instagram. Before we get to those, Hailey, you sort of like threw in something about horror being inherently queer. And because this is like a queer horror chat, I wonder if you could like expand on that a little bit.
I don't know if I can get it in perfect words off the top of my head, but I do feel like, for a lot of us, we watch a horror movie, read a horror book, and I think there is kind of some resonance with the monsters. Just this sense of like you're the one kept out of the community, you're the one kept out of the township, the what is considered normal. And Lindsay is furiously typing all the different kinds of monsters that are gay, which is all correct.
Not to interrupt you, but I have to.
No, it's like mermaid. Yeah, ghosts are gay, mermaids are gay. Hell, it can get outside of type. Like the Tingler is gay. The relative that's held in the attic in a gothic horror story is gay.
Oh my God, absolutely. The mad woman in the attic is so queer coded.
Like it's just there, and that's the thing. There is so much queer coding throughout these things. And it's funny because someone was, I forget who was talking to me about like slashers being heteronormative, and I'm like, have you watched how campy these movies are? They're definitely cool. They feel like a guy being like, no, I'm definitely not gay, and it's just like he's a little bi. I mean, if you want to get into stuff, there's horror that I feel is purposely being as like against queerness as it can, but that's when it is insisting on how normal it is.
Yeah, and that's pretty
right. It's that's right. That's like you.
As soon as you get into like. As soon as it's like starts getting really homophobic, it also starts getting really gay, because then it's like, oh, the monster is gay. Cool, that's ours now. We're taking that. Vampires have always been gay. Like the first vampire novel was Carmilla. Like, Dracula is also gay. Every vampire, and that's actually never been a heterosexual,
because Bram Stoker is so. Definitely like sex is definitely not something I'm interested in, especially not men, like intimacy between men in any possible way.
Horrible
especially intimacy between these two men who are giving blood transfusions to the same woman. There's nothing gay about
it. No homo. Actually, no homo, bro.
this sort of transitions, I think, into one of the questions that we have from your followers. This is from Stacy. Lindsay has a zombie book now, and Hailey has a vampire book soon. What classic monsters do you want to do next?
I'm working on a demon book. I'm working on a demonic possession book, which is called This Is My Body, and it's coming out from Quirk in 2025. So demons are gay. We've got that. I really want to, I don't have like a specific plan for this. I don't have a concept, but I want to do something with scary gay mermaids one of these days. Like, I don't know what exactly, but it's got to happen eventually.
Love that.
What about you, Hailey?
Yeah, I mean, vampires was already a big commitment because I do try to like kind of come up with my own monsters, and I did that a little bit with I'm just gonna with All the Hearts You Eat.
Yeah, your vampires are a fresh twist.
Thank you. I think I would like to do something with werewolves at some point, but it's one of those things where I'm just like, we have gay werewolves, we have trans werewolves, and I'm trying to I want to approach it from some different angle. I just am not sure what that is yet. But I don't want it to be a werewolf like it's a queer person who turns into a werewolf. We have a lot of that. I want to kind of explore something else with it, but I haven't figured that out quite yet. So yeah, but someday I hope to.
Sort of relatedly, we have a question from Cynthia. Imagine you get to put together a whole track of queer horror programming at a conference. What are the themes or topics you'd want and why?
Oh my gosh. I love this question. I love you, Cynthia. I want to like plan this conference together. This is from Cynthia Gomez, author of the forthcoming short story collection, The Nightmare Box and Other Stories,
Which
I believe is coming out in July. Phenomenal book.
Get her
I
on
mean, I feel like, what's that?
Put her on a panel at your fantasy conference, I feel like.
Oh, hell yeah. I want to talk about the reading that I'm doing with Cynthia in San Diego next week, but by the time this goes live, that will have already happened. So sorry to everyone who didn't see that, because I'm sure it was amazing. Yeah, I feel like a whole curriculum on lesbian vampires, definitely, with a heavy focus on the Gilda stories. We could. There's definitely like queerness and body horror, I think, would be really fascinating to explore. I mean, Hailey, God, we didn't even talk about the Queen of Teeth. We had this whole conversation and we didn't even get into your like tooth tentacle bird eating vagina monster book. Oh my God. Y'all, if you have not read Hailey Piper and you're like, she has so many books, where do I start? Start with Queen of Teeth. You will not regret
it. As Lindsay's endorsement on the inside.
They didn't actually put So Fucking Good and So Fucking Gay on the cover, right? Because that was what I actually said about it.
Yeah,
it's a good blurb.
I think they did for the ebook, but I don't think for the paperback.
I love that.
Calvin Kasulki told me that he was going to use this book "fucks" as a blurb for Zord, and then he wrote something slightly different, and then claimed that I told him he couldn't, and I was like, no, you absolutely could.
Well, that's the hard thing, because every now and then you get something that's like, Joe Koch is another queer author that everybody should be reading, and his new book Invagines comes out in June, and I wrote a normal blurb, but then I also wrote a blurb about how it's like this drill weapon from a Nintendo 64 game burrowing into your brain. They didn't use that one, but it's just one of those little things where it's like, come on, I had something unique. It's like, no, that's not what blurbs are for. As far as programming, I don't know, because I'm really bad at coming up with programming for conventions, which is why no one asks me to do that kind of thing. I do think an important panel would be about essentially just kind of navigating publishing as a queer person, because the thing is, although when you asked about the editor pushback thing, I didn't really have a lot of that happening. You do end up, unfortunately, having to educate editors a lot of the time on stuff. Like there was I remember with All the Hearts You Eat, because Rex is a trans man, and there's a reference to that he'd started one puberty and then another, and like the editor had adjusted that sentence, and I was like, no, this is a trans thing. We say this way. And that's like a tiny example. It's not like, it's not, no harm is meant, but unfortunately you do end up having to kind of explain some things. So I think a panel about that, or some kind of talk about that, would be helpful for a lot of younger or less experienced writers.
I would want to do a panel on like queer romantic horror, queer erotic horror, because I just like that, and that's awesome. And I think it'd be really fun to talk about,
Yeah.
Like I've seen like horror romance and erotic horror like discussions before, but I don't think I've ever seen one that was all queer, and I think that would be really dope.
I feel like a lot of it is queer on its, like the books themselves are, though.
That's true.
Like, because the ones that pop into my head are like Exquisite Corpse, To Be Devoured, what is Saint's book? A Dowry of Blood, Hell Carmilla.
A Dowry of Blood. That's a good one.
I feel like this is shaping up to be a good conference.
Yeah.
We have a question from Rachel. How can I get back to enjoying end of the world stories like zombie outbreaks after the pandemic?
Oh,
that's
my.
a good question. I don't know. I think for me, I wrote the Z Word in 2020. And so for me, it was very like cathartic, and I was kind of processing a lot of my end of the world feelings. And I also, I wanted to read and watch apocalyptic stories a lot. And I've wanted to read and watch them a lot since then. And I know a lot of people had very much the opposite reaction. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like if it's not doing it for you right now, it's okay to give it more time, And I definitely get that it feels shitty to like not be able to enjoy something that you used to enjoy. I went through a brief period after my best friend died where I couldn't watch horror movies at all because anybody dying for any reason just made me sob, and it was too overwhelming. And that did feel bad. It felt bad to be like, I've lost this thing that I used to love. But I got it back. And I think if it's something that you love and that is important to your life, you will get it back. And I think you're probably more likely to get it back if you wait until you genuinely like want to engage with it, instead of being like, I need to read this book or I need to watch this movie because it's something I would have liked 5 years ago, so I need to make myself like it now. You know what I mean? I think I think you just have to kind of maybe give yourself the time that you need to process it and come back around on it.
I agree with everything Lindsay said. There's no sunk cost fallacy for your interests. You just because you've been interested in something for a long period of time, it doesn't mean you have to try to recapture that or renormalize it or whatever. It's okay. Books don't have expiration dates. They'll still be waiting for you when you're ready for them. But you shouldn't try to force yourself, because I think that actually just is going to make it take even longer before you can get back to something like that.
Yeah. And maybe if you, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say, if people are ready to dip their toes back into a zombie book, I feel like you could do worse than Z Word because of the sort of focus on community. And like, it does really have, even though, I mean, I'm not going to say anything about the ending. It's certainly not like a rah like easy ending, but it does have a lot of optimism to it. So.
I agree, because I'll just say this: I'm kind of sick of zombies, but not the Z Word. The Z Word was a breath of fresh air, and I feel like it's a counter argument to, because if you think of typical zombies like the Romero movies, and a lot of that is people being put in a difficult situation and then falling apart. And I feel like the Z word is the opposite. People band together. People want to help each other. They aren't necessarily happy about it. They aren't always nice about it, but they are understanding that we are all we've got. Like, and that is basic core humanity. Like, that is, like, people are like, oh, survival of the fittest, blah blah blah. That is not how our species survived, like being not human, like pre-humans. We survived when we decided to stop acting like herd animals that abandoned the weakest who's been caught by a predator and started throwing rocks at the saber-toothed tigers to stop them from killing our babies and our old elderly and each other. Like, it was just like, no, we all have to do this together. And that's how we survived. That's how our species came up through the millennia. And so when you tap into that and understand that we're in this together, that's true humanity. Not us falling apart.
Yeah. If anybody is interested in reading a really like compelling and interesting nonfiction book on this subject, I really recommend A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, which is about moments throughout history when a community that has been devastated by some kind of disaster does exactly that, comes together to support each other and rebuild. It's really interesting, and it definitely, you know, you just read it and feel like, okay, maybe possibly things will be okay a little bit eventually.
I feel like that's actually a lovely note to end this discussion on, even if perhaps incongruous with the discussion of horror. But there is, I think, often
I don't think so, actually. I think that is key to horror, because the thing is, even if you read the bleakest damn book you can find, that book still ends and you put it down and you are back to yourself and like, well, I'm glad I'm not going through that.
Yeah. I think even when there's not optimism, there's catharsis or
exactly.
there's, you know, it feels so good when I stop hitting myself with this hammer. You guys, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Hailey, for being with us. Thank you, Lindsay. I do recommend, of course, that everybody read The Z Word, which I love very dearly. Obviously, go in and seek out Hailey's deep bench, enormous oeuvre of works. And
pre-order All the Heart Sweet, because it slaps. You're going to love it.
and also keep an eye out for This Is My Body next year. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jess. Thanks, Hailey. Great to talk to you both. Have a great weekend.
Wonderful.
You too.